Queen Zalara stood at the edge of her crystal palace, looking out at the endless purple sky of her home planet. Her world was beautiful, filled with glowing towers that reached up like fingers toward the stars, and rivers that sparkled like liquid diamonds. But today, all this beauty felt empty to her. For 300 years, she had ruled over her people with wisdom and strength. The Viridian Empire stretched across 12 star systems, and millions of beings looked up to her as their leader. She had solved wars between distant worlds, brought peace to angry neighbors, and helped her people grow and prosper. Everyone said she was the greatest queen their race had ever known. But right now, none of that mattered, because somewhere out there, lost among the countless stars, was her youngest child. Prince Kai was only 50 years old, just a teenager by their people's way of counting. He had bright, curious eyes that lit up when he learned something new, and a laugh that sounded like crystal bells ringing in the wind. He loved to explore, always asking questions about everything he saw. "Mother, why do the stars dance differently in each system?" he would ask. "Mother, what makes some planets sing while others stay quiet?" 2 months ago, Kai had begged to go on his first official trip to the outer colonies, it was supposed. To be simple, a routine visit to meet with local leaders and learn how government really worked. The royal guards had promised to keep him safe. The ships were the best in their fleet. Everything that could go wrong had been planned for, except for what actually happened. The convoy had simply vanished. One day they were sending regular messages reporting that everything was fine. The next day, silence. Complete terrifying silence. Zalara had sent every ship she could spare to search. Her best pilots flew in wide circles through space, scanning every asteroid, every dead planet, every hidden corner where a ship might drift. Her telepathic scouts reached out with their minds, trying to feel even the faintest trace of her son's thoughts. Her scientists built new sensors, hoping to catch signals that normal equipment might miss. Week after week, they found nothing. No wreckage. No emergency beacons. No sign that the ships had ever existed at all. The Queen barely slept during those long weeks of searching. She spent her days in the communication center, listening to report after report of empty space and false hopes. "We detected something." "In Sector 7, a pilot would say, and her heart would jump. Then minutes later, "Sorry, Your Majesty. It was just space debris from an old mining operation." Her advisors tried to comfort her. "Perhaps they were captured by pirates," Old Velton suggested. "Pirates keep their prisoners alive for ransom." But pirates would have contacted them by now, demanding payment for the prince's return. "Maybe they discovered something wonderful and forgot to report in," offered young Nira. But the prince's personal communicator was linked directly to his mother's heart through their people's special connection. If he was alive and well, she would feel it. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks stretched toward to months, a cold truth began to settle into the Queen's mind. Her search fleets were running low on fuel. The ships needed repairs. People needed their queen to focus on the daily business of running an empire, not on a search that might never end. The hardest part was the hope that refused to die. Every morning, Zalara would wake up thinking, maybe today they'll find him. Every night she would look up at the stars and whisper, "Come home, my little explorer. Please come home." But hope, she was learning, could be crueler than despair. Her people began to whisper in the hallways, said the Queen was neglecting her duties. Trade disputes weren't being settled. Important decisions were being delayed. The empire needed its leader, but their leader's heart was lost somewhere. In the dark between the stars, finally on a morning when the twin suns cast long shadows across her throne room, Queen Zalara made the hardest decision of her long life. She called her admirals together and spoke the words that felt like ice in her throat. "Bring the search fleets home." The room fell silent. Admiral Corvex, who had been leading the search, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we can continue for another month, maybe 2. There are still unexplored regions? No." The Queen's voice was steady, but her advisors could see the light fading from her crystalline skin. "The Empire needs those ships. Our people need protection. And I... ... She paused, swallowing hard. "I need to accept what has happened." Night, alone in her private chambers, Zialara began the ancient ritual of Kethanel, the ceremony of letting go. She took off her bright royal robes and put on the gray clothes of mourning. She dimmed the crystals in her room until they barely glowed. She sang the old sad songs that her people had sung for thousands of years, when someone they loved was lost forever. The ritual was sacred among her people. Once a parent performed Cathenal for a lost child, they could never take it back. If by some miracle the child returned, the parent could never officially acknowledge them again. It was a way to protect the mind from false hope, to let the heart finally heal from wounds that might never close otherwise, as she sang the final verse of the ceremony. Queen Zialara felt something inside her chest turn cold and hard. The part of her that was a mother, the part that had rocked Prince Kai to sleep and taught him the names of the stars, quietly went to sleep. When she emerged from her chambers 3 days later, her people saw a different queen. Her skin had permanently shifted to the dull gray of deep mourning. Her voice was steady and efficient. She made decisions quickly and fairly, but without the warmth that had once made her beloved. The queen of the Viridian Empire was ruling again, but the mother who had loved a curious little prince was gone, buried under layers of necessary grief and carefully controlled despair. In the weeks that followed, Zialara moved to the Spire of Solitude, the highest tower in her palace. From there, she could manage her empire through the crystal communication networks without having to see the pity in her people's eyes. She told herself this was better, safer. A broken heart couldn't break again if it was properly protected. She never looked up at the stars anymore. Some kinds of hope, she had learned, were too dangerous to allow. Chat controls, Sonnet 4. Dr. Alina Reeves had always been the curious type. Even as a little girl back on Earth, she was the one turning over rocks to see what lived underneath, collecting strange insects in jars, and asking her parents endless questions about how things worked. Now, 35 years old and floating through space aboard the research vessel Starbound Explorer, she was still asking questions, just on a much bigger scale. For 3 years, Lena had been part of humanity's first deep space exploration mission. While other crew members focused on finding new planets suitable for human colonies, Elena's job was different. She was a xenobiologist, someone who studied the possibility of life beyond Earth. So far, they'd found plenty of dead rocks, some interesting minerals, and exactly 0 signs of intelligent life. That morning started like any other. Elena was in her small laboratory, analyzing soil samples from a planet they'd visited last week, when her computer started beeping. Not the gentle beep that meant new data coming in, but the urgent, attention-grabbing beep that meant something unusual is happening. She looked at her screen and felt her heart skip a beat. Her long-range scanner had picked up something in orbit around a small moon in the system they were currently exploring. The computer was showing readings that made no sense. Metal alloys that shouldn't exist, energy signatures unlike anything in human technology. And most importantly, a faint but steady signal that could only mean one thing. Life. Elena stared at the data for a full minute, double-checking everything. The signal was weak, but definitely there. The kind of biological energy signature that only came from a living being. And whatever was out there was in trouble. The readings showed failing power systems and what looked like critical life support. Problems by all the rules and regulations of deep space exploration. Lena should have immediately contacted Captain Torres. First contact situations required a full diplomatic team, extensive safety protocols, and approval from Earth Command. The proper procedure would take hours, maybe days to organize, but the life signs were getting weaker by the minute. Elena looked at the scanner again. The signal was so faint now that she worried it might disappear entirely while they were busy following proper procedures. Somewhere out there, possibly for the first time in human history, an alien being was dying alone in the cold darkness of space. She made a decision that would change everything. Elena grabbed her emergency medical kit, the one designed to handle any biological crisis that might come up during their mission. She put on her best exploration suit, the one with 6 hours of air and enough supplies to handle basic emergencies. Then she climbed into one of the ship's small scout vessels and flew toward the mysterious signal. As she got closer, Elena's breath caught in her throat. The ship she was approaching was unlike anything she had ever imagined. It wasn't the cold mechanical design that humans used for space travel. Instead, it looked almost alive, smooth curves that flowed like water, surfaces that seemed to pulse. With their own inner light, a beauty that made her think of coral reefs growing in the deep ocean, the vessel was clearly damaged. Parts of it were dark that should have been glowing, and she could see places where the elegant curves had been broken by whatever disaster had brought it here. But even hurt and dying, the ship was the most beautiful thing Elena had ever seen. She docked her small scout ship carefully and found an airlock that her computer said was compatible with human equipment. The moment she stepped inside the alien vessel, Elena felt like she had walked into a dream. The corridors were lined with walls that glowed softly, like someone had captured moonlight and mixed it into the metal itself. The air was filled with a gentle humming sound that reminded her of whale songs, and everything around her seemed to pulse with a rhythm like a slow, steady heartbeat. Elena followed her scanner deeper into the ship, through passages that curved and flowed like the inside of a seashell. The life signal was getting stronger, but also more urgent. Whatever was alive in here was running out of time. She found him in what seemed to be the heart of the ship, a chamber filled with tall, crystal formations that pulsed with soft blue light. At least most of them were pulsing. Several had gone dark, and the ones that were still working were getting dimmer by the minute. In the center of the chamber, collapsed, next to what looked like some kind of control panel, was a being unlike anything in Earth's databases. He was roughly human-shaped, but taller and thinner, with skin that seemed to be made of translucent crystal. His body glowed with patterns of soft light that moved under his skin like slow lightning. But those patterns were flickering and fading. His face was beautiful in an otherworldly way, with large eyes that held an intelligence both ancient and heartbreakingly young. He was clearly dying. Elena's medical training kicked in immediately. She knelt beside the alien and began checking for vital signs. His breathing was shallow and irregular, his skin was turning an alarming gray color, and the light patterns under his surface were barely visible. She had no idea what normal vital signs should look like for his species. She knew what dying looked like in any language. Working quickly, Elena set up her portable medical unit, a device designed to create a safe environment for treating unknown biological threats. She managed to move the alien into the unit's protective field and began adjusting the atmosphere to match what her scanner said he needed to breathe. For the next several hours, Elena worked harder than she had ever worked in her life. Every piece of medical knowledge she had, adapted equipment designed for humans to work with alien biology, and basically made up new medical procedures as she went along. Slowly, credibly, it started to work. The alien's breathing became stronger and more regular. The gray color began to fade from his skin, replaced by soft blues and purples. Most amazingly, the light patterns under his skin began to pulse more steadily, like a heart rhythm returning to normal. As Elena watched, the alien's large eyes opened and looked directly at her. There was surprise there and confusion, but also something that made her smile gratitude. She had found him. She had saved him. And now Elena realized as she looked into those ancient, intelligent eyes, nothing would ever be the same for either of their species. The alien tried to sit up, his hand reaching toward Elena in what seemed like a gesture of thanks. When his fingers touched her arm, Elena felt something incredible, a warm sensation in her mind, like someone gently touching her thoughts. Not invading or controlling, just ... connecting. In that moment, Elena understood that she wasn't just looking at a new form of life. She was looking at someone's child, someone who was lost and afraid and very, very far from home. And somehow, impossibly, he was now her responsibility. She had no idea that far across the galaxy, a queen who had given up all hope was sitting, alone in a tower, never knowing how close a miracle was to finding its way back to her. 6 months. It's how long Elena had been living the most impossible life she could have ever imagined. What started as a routine scientific mission had turned into something that felt like a beautiful dream. mixed with a constant worry that never went away, the alien boy, who had somehow communicated that his name was Kai, was nothing like what Lena had expected when she dreamed about meeting life from other worlds. He wasn't some mysterious, distant being from science fiction movies. Instead, he was curious, funny, and surprisingly similar to human teenagers. She had known back on Earth Kai had an endless appetite for learning about everything around him. He would spend hours watching Alina work in her laboratory, his large eyes following every movement she made. When she showed him how human computers worked, he would tilt his head to the side in a way that reminded her of a puzzled puppy. She played music from Earth. The light patterns under his skin would dance along with the rhythm. But the most amazing thing about Kai was his gift for understanding emotions. Alina had figured out that his people could actually feel what others were feeling, not just guess or imagine, but really experience the emotions of those around them. It was like having a constant, gentle connection to everyone nearby. This gift made communication possible long before they figured out each other's languages. When Alina felt worried about his health, Kai would sense her concern and try to show her that he was feeling better. When she was excited about a new discovery, he would light up with the same joy. Even if he didn't understand exactly what had made her happy. Slowly, day by day, they began to understand each other better. Kai learned to speak simple English words, while Alina picked up some of the musical tones that made up his language. More importantly, they learned to trust each other completely. Alina discovered that Kai wasn't just any alien, he was royalty. Through a combination of pictures drawn on her tablet, simple words, and the emotional connection they shared, Kai managed to explain that he was a prince. His mother was the queen of a vast empire that stretched across many star systems. Had been traveling with important officials when something had gone wrong with their ships. The details were still unclear. But Alina understood enough to know that Kai's people probably thought he was dead. He had been missing for months now, and his damaged ship had drifted far from where the accident had happened. Even if they were still searching for him, it would be looking in the wrong place. This knowledge created a problem that kept Alina awake at night. The human research vessel Starbound Explorer was heading toward a new system, taking them further away from Kai's home every day. Soon they would be so far from his people that it might take years to get him back to them. Alina had choices to make. None of them were easy. The first choice was whether to tell her captain and crew about Kai. She had managed to keep him secret for 6 months by setting up a special living area in one of the unused cargo bays. She told everyone she was working on a long-term biological experiment that required complete isolation. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Alina knew that if Captain Torres found out about Kai, everything would change. The boy would be taken away from her and handed over to government scientists and military officials. They would want to study him, question him, and use him to learn about his people's technology and weaknesses. Alina had seen how excited some of her fellow humans got when they talked about the possibility of finding alien civilizations to contact or conquer. The thought of Kai being treated like a specimen instead of a person made Alina feel sick too. Her stomach. Through their emotional connection, Kai sensed her fears about this possibility. She could feel his terror at the idea of being separated from her and studied by strangers. But the second choice was even harder. Alina had been secretly working on modifying one of the ship's small scout vessels, preparing it for a journey that would take them back toward Kai's home. She had been studying star charts, calculating fuel requirements, and trying to figure out if such a trip was even possible. The numbers weren't encouraging. Kai's home was incredibly far away, in a part of space that humans had never explored. The journey would be dangerous, and there was no guarantee they would survive it. Even if they made it to his people's territory, there was no way to know how an alien empire would react to a human ship appearing in their space. Alina might be seen as a kidnapper or a spy. She might be attacked before she had a chance to explain that she was trying to return their prince. And even if everything went perfectly, she would have to say goodbye to Kai forever and somehow find her way back to human space if that was even possible. But as the days passed and Alina watched Kai, staring out at the stars with homesickness written clearly across his glowing features, she knew what she had to do. This wasn't just about following rules or making safe choices anymore. This was about a young person who missed his family, and a mother somewhere among the stars who probably cried herself to sleep. Every night, wondering what had happened to her child, Alina began working longer, hours on her secret modifications to the scout ship. Kai, sensing her determination through their connection, started teaching her everything he could remember about his people's culture, their language, and the proper way to approach his mother's court. He drew pictures of his home world, beautiful. Cities made of living crystal, rivers that glowed with their own light, and a palace that reached up toward the stars like a mountain made of pure light. He taught Alina the special songs that identified members of his family, and the formal words she would need to know to request an audience with the queen. Most importantly, Kai shared with Alina the deep love he felt for his mother. Through their emotional connection, Alina could feel the strength of the bond between mother and son. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced, pure, unconditional love mixed with respect, admiration, and a homesickness so deep it was almost painful. Alina began to understand that returning Kai wasn't just the right thing to do, it was the only thing she could do and still be able to live with herself. This boy had become like a son to her, and she knew that any parent would move mountains to bring their child home. Late at night, when Kai was sleeping in his special chamber filled with the gentle lights that reminded him of home, Alina would sit by his side and make her plans. She calculated routes through space, studied his people's history, and prepared for a journey that would either save a family or end her own life. Neither of them knew that far away. Queen Zilara sat alone in her tower, having given up all hope of ever seeing her son again. Neither of them could imagine that their arrival would shatter years of carefully controlled grief, bring new life to a queen who had thought her heart was permanently broken. But Alina knew one thing for certain. She would get this boy home to his mother, no matter what it cost her. Alina's hands were shaking as she made the final preparations for their escape. It was 3 a.m. by the ship's artificial clock, and most of the crew was asleep. This was it, their only chance to slip away unnoticed and begin the most dangerous journey of her life. She had spent weeks secretly modifying the scout ship Hope's Dream, working late into the night when everyone else was sleeping. Extra fuel tanks, improved life support systems, better navigation equipment. Everything she could think of to give them a fighting chance of surviving the long journey to Kai's homeworld. Kai was waiting for her in the cargo bay, his skin glowing with nervous excitement. Over the past month, he had taught Alina everything he could remember about his people's territory, their customs, and the complex network of alliances that governed their part of the galaxy. Now, sensing Alina's fear through their emotional connection, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We'll make it," he said in his careful English, the words mixed with the musical tones of his native language. "Together, we'll make it home." Alina nodded, trying to feel as confident as she sounded. "Your mother's going to be so happy to see you." They climbed aboard the small ship, and Alina began the startup sequence she had practiced 100 times in her head. The engines hummed to life with barely a whisper, another modification she had made to avoid waking the crew. Within minutes, they were floating free in space, watching the lights of the starbound explorer grow smaller behind them. Alina had left behind detailed files explaining everything. Her research on Kai's biology, her notes about his culture, and a long letter explaining why she had to make this choice. She hoped her colleagues would understand, but she knew many of them would think she had lost her mind. The first few days of their journey passed smoothly. Alina had plotted a course that would take them through relatively empty space, avoiding the busy trade routes where they might encounter other ships. Kai proved to be an excellent co-pilot. His natural connection to crystal-based technology, allowing him to interface with the ship's computers in ways that amazed Alina. But their real challenges began when they reached the edge of human space and entered territory controlled by other alien civilizations. The first encounter happened near a gas giant where they had stopped to refuel. Alina was outside the ship in her spacesuit, connecting the fuel lines, when Kai suddenly grabbed her arm and pointed toward the horizon of the planet they were orbiting. 3 ships were rising toward them, sleek, predatory-looking vessels that definitely weren't human. Alina's heart sank as she realized they had been discovered. Kai, what do we do? She whispered into her helmet radio. Let me talk to them, Kai replied, his voice steady despite the fear Alina could feel through. Their connection. I know their markings, their Nexori. They have trade agreements with my people. What followed was the most terrifying 20 minutes of Elena's life. Kai spoke to the alien ships using the communication equipment, his voice taking on formal tones that Alina had never heard before. He was no longer the curious teenager she had been taking care of. He was Prince Kai of the Viridian Empire. Speaking with the authority of someone born to rule, Alina couldn't understand the words, but she could feel Kai's confidence growing as he explained their situation to the Nexari captains. Finally, after what felt like hours, the alien ships pulled back and allowed them to continue their journey. What did you tell them? Alina asked as they resumed their course. The truth, Kai said simply. I am returning home with a friend who saved my life, the Nexari. Respect, honor, and friendship. They understood. As they traveled deeper into alien space, Lena began to see a different side of Kai. The frightened lost boy she had rescued was still there. But he was also something more, a diplomat, a leader, someone who had been trained from birth to navigate the complex politics of multiple alien civilizations. He guided Lena through territories controlled by beings she couldn't have imagined in her wildest dreams. They passed crystal cities that floated in the void between stars, massive space stations that looked like living creatures, and ships so large they had their own weather systems. Each encounter tested Kai's knowledge and Elena's courage. Some aliens were curious about the human traveling with a Viridian prince. Others were suspicious or hostile. Kai always seemed to know the right words to say, the proper protocols to follow, the ancient agreements between species that would allow them safe passage. During the long hours in hyperspace between encounters, Kai and Alina grew even closer. He told her stories about his childhood, about learning to fly crystal ships before he could properly walk, about state dinners where he had to memorize the names and preferences of ambassadors from dozens of different worlds, about quiet moments with his mother when she would sing him the old songs that connected their people to the stars. Alina shared her own memories growing up on Earth, dreaming of exploring space, the excitement of her first assignment aboard the Starbound Explorer. She told Kai about human families, about how parents and children stayed connected even when they were far apart, about the universal love that existed between mothers and their young. As they talked, Lena began to understand something that broke her heart and filled her with pride at the same time. Through their emotional connection, she could feel how much Kai had grown during their months together. He was still the same sweet, curious boy she had rescued, but he was also becoming a wise young leader who would someday help his people navigate the challenges of ruling an interstellar empire. But with each passing day as they drew closer to his home, Alina also felt the growing sadness of their approaching separation. Kai had become like a son to her, and she knew that once they reached his mother's court, their relationship would have to change forever. The hardest part was watching Kai struggle with the same emotions. Through their connection, Alina could feel his excitement at the thought of seeing his mother again, mixed with genuine grief at the idea of losing the human woman who had become his second family. "Will I ever see you again?" I asked one night as they sat watching the stars stream past their windows. Alina didn't know how to answer. The truth was that she had no idea how she would get back to human space, or if such a journey was even possible. But she also knew that some sacrifices were worth making regardless of the cost. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I know that no matter what happens, we'll always be connected. You'll always be my brave prince, and I'll always be proud to have known you." As they entered the final phase of their journey, approaching the borders of Viridian space, both Alina and Kai could feel their emotions reaching a breaking point. They were almost home, but they were also almost at the end of their time together. Neither of them knew that Queen Zillara, sitting alone in her tower, was about to experience the greatest shock of her long life. Neither could imagine that their arrival would not only reunite a mother and son, but also change the course of galactic history forever. All they knew was that they had made it this far together, and whatever happened next, they would face it with the unbreakable bond they had, forged among the stars. Queen Zilara hadn't looked out her window in months. The view from the Spire of Solitude showed the most beautiful parts of her empire. Crystal cities that sparkled like jewels, gardens that glowed with bioluminescent flowers, and the twin suns that painted everything in shades of gold and purple. But beauty had become painful for the queen. Every lovely sight reminded her of the child who would never see his home again. She spent her days managing the empire through crystal communication networks, making decisions and solving problems without ever having to leave her tower. Her advisors had grown used to her new way of ruling. They would send reports through the crystal systems, receive her orders the same way, and pretend that their queen wasn't slowly disappearing from grief. But on this particular morning, something was different. It started as a whisper in the crystal networks, a familiar harmony that couldn't possibly be real. Queen Zilara was reviewing trade agreements when she felt it, a gentle vibration in the communication crystals that reminded her of something she had forced herself to forget at first. Her mind was playing tricks on her, creating false hope from random signals in the network. This had happened before during the long months of mourning. Sometimes her brain would interpret normal sounds as Kai's voice, or mistake the movement of light as the glow patterns that marked his presence. But this signal was different. It wasn't random or unclear. It was purposeful, musical, and heartbreakingly familiar. Someone was singing the lullaby she used to sing too. Prince Kai. Queen Zilara stood up so quickly that her chair fell over. The crystal formations around her tower began to pulse in response to her sudden emotional spike, filling the room with nervous light. This was impossible. No one else knew those songs. They were private melodies she had created just for her son. Mathematical harmonies that expressed the unique love between a mother and child. The singing continued, growing stronger and more clear. It wasn't just the melodies she remembered, but new verses, new harmonies that built upon the original songs in ways that showed deep understanding and genuine growth. Whoever was singing had not only learned her lullabies, but had lived with them, grown with them, made them part of their own heart. Zilara pressed her hands against the crystal communication panel, opening her mind fully to the network for the first time in months. What she felt there made her gasp aloud. It was Kai, definitely, unmistakably, her lost son. But he wasn't alone. Through the crystal network, the queen could sense another presence, warm, protective, and utterly alien, human mind, filled with love and fierce devotion to the young prince. The connection between Kai and this human was unlike anything Zilara had ever experienced. It wasn't the formal bond between ruler and subject, or even the casual friendship between equals. It was something much deeper, the love of a parent for a child, freely given across the barriers of species and biology. For a moment, Queen Zilara couldn't move. The ritual of Kethanol was sacred and irreversible. She had officially declared her son lost to the void. By the ancient laws of her people, she couldn't acknowledge his return, even if he stood before her in person. But as she felt the joy and hope radiating from Kai's mind, mixed with the gentle love of the human who had somehow saved him, Queen Zilara made a decision that would shock her empire. She abandoned her tower for the first time in months and began the long journey down through her Crystal Palace. Her staff watched in amazement as their queen moved through the corridors with more purpose than she had shown since Kai's disappearance. The gray morning tones in her skin began to shift and change, showing hints of the vibrant colors that had once made her famous throughout the galaxy. Zilara didn't go to the main landing platforms where official visits were received. Instead, following the Crystal Network's guidance, she walked to the Garden of First Memories, the sacred grove where she had played with Kai when he was small, where she had taught him his first songs and watched him take his first steps among the singing crystal trees. She arrived just as a small, clearly human spacecraft was landing between the memory crystals. The ship was obviously modified, patched together with parts that didn't quite match, showing signs of a long, difficult journey. But it had made it here, carrying the most precious cargo in the universe. The ship's door opened, and Queen Zilara felt her heart stop. Prince Kai stepped out first. looking older and wiser than when she had last seen him, but unmistakably her son. His skin glowed with health and happiness, and his eyes held a confidence that hadn't been there before. He had grown during his time away, not just physically, but emotionally, becoming more than the curious boy who had left on his first diplomatic mission. Behind him came the human. Alina was small by Viridian standards, with the kind of determined face that suggested she had faced impossible odds and refused to give up. She moved carefully, clearly nervous about meeting an alien queen. But her eyes never left Kai, even from a distance. Zillara could see the love and protectiveness that radiated from this strange human female. For a long moment, mother and son simply looked at each other across the crystal garden. 300 years of royal training ward with 6 months of desperate grief in Zilara's mind. The law said she couldn't acknowledge him. Her heart said she didn't care about the law. Solve the problem for her. He ran across the garden like the child he had been when he left, throwing himself into his mother's arms with pure joy. The moment he touched her, their empathic connection flowed back to life, and Queen Zillara felt her son's love wash over her like warm sunlight after a long, cold winter. Through their connection, she experienced everything. The accident that had stranded him, the months of drifting alone and dying, Elena's incredible rescue, and the long journey home. She felt Elena's love for her son as if it were her own emotion, pure and selfless and completely genuine. Queen Zillara held her son close and began to cry tears that crystallized as they fell, each one catching the light of the twin suns and casting rainbows across the sacred grove. Where her tears touched the ground, something amazing happened. New crystal formations began to grow. Unlike anything that had ever existed before, these weren't the standard blue-white crystals of Viridian technology. Instead, they pulsed with a warm golden light that seemed to combine the best of both worlds, the ancient wisdom of her people and the fierce, protective love that humans felt for their young. Finally, the queen raised her head and looked at Alina, who was standing quietly nearby, clearly overwhelmed by the reunion she had made possible. "You brought him home," Zillara said in careful English, her voice thick with emotion and gratitude. Alina nodded, tears streaming down her own face. "He missed you so much. Every day he talked about getting back to you. You gave up everything. To help him, it was worth it," Alina said simply. "He's an amazing kid. You should be proud of him." Queen Zillara stepped toward the human who had saved her son, her mind already working on the implications of this moment. Alina had risked her life, abandoned her career, and traveled across impossible distances to return a lost child to his mother. This was exactly the kind of honor and selflessness that the Viridian Empire respected above all else. "Alina of Earth," the queen said formally, "you have given me back my son and my reason for living. How can my people repay such a gift?" Alina looked confused for a moment, then smiled through her tears. "Your Majesty, seeing him happy and home with you is all the payment I need." As the three of them stood together in the Garden of First Memories, surrounded by the growing bridge crystals that sparkled with combined human and Viridian light, Queen Zillara realized that this moment would change everything. Not just for her family, but for both their civilizations. Alina had proven that love could transcend any barrier, that kindness existed beyond the boundaries of species, and that sometimes the most important victories came not from conquest or politics, but from simple acts of compassion. The queen smiled, feeling truly happy for the first time in months. "Alina of Earth, I think it's time we talked about making sure you can visit us again." "After all," she said, looking at her son who was grinning with pure joy, "family should stay in touch.